Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe weekly podcast. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe thought we would last. Talking Joe is there. Find each other like a married couple. Our podcast on the air. Talking Joe is there.
Talking Joe is the code name for a completely untrained special podcast force. Its purpose, to produce a regular comic review show while breaking and replacing a series of presenters from across the world.
Talking Joe. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe. We are on our soapbox. Nobody seems to care. Fighting for fandom wherever there's trouble. The podcast on the air. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe. Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey ho, let's go. It's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast, which, if you ignore all the other G.I. Joe podcasts, is by far the most popular. If you're new to the show, you can find the details over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. And today we will be looking at G.I. Joe issue 286 with a very special guest. But before we get to that, let me introduce the Omni-Man to my Invincible. It's my co-host, a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners, and hello to our guest, who Mark is about to introduce.
Let's do it. Let's go for it. We've got a special guest today, and that special guest is...
All right, stop. Whatever you're doing, TJ's back, the airwaves we're chewing, rocking a G.I. Joe podcast. Interview special, questions will be asked. TJ interview. TJ interview.
The artist of the issue we were about to talk about, it is Andrew Lee Griffith.
Hello. Hi.
Andrew is an American comic book artist and is often found in Cusco, Peru, where his wife is from. Andrew is best known for his variant work cover for Gem and the Holograms, but has also worked on the Transformers comics for IDW. But most significantly, he's worked on 5 of the last 6 issues of G.I. Joe, including issue 286 that we are talking about today. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. So every time we've been doing the credits, we've noted that there is Andrew Lee Griffith. So why the extra Lee? Is it because there's another artist who's called Andrew Griffith that you want to differentiate yourself from?
No, but there is an actor of a previous generation that has a very similar name to myself that people often, for some reason, confuse me with, even though I would, if anything, be like his grandson. But so yeah, it's just I still get people at conventions that come up to be like, "Are you Andy Griffith? Are you the?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Wow.
That show was on in the '60s, and just trying to move away from that. When I first started, I actually would have used like a pseudonym or something, or maybe going by Lee or something because that's my middle name. But I was announced on a project with just Andrew Griffith, and I just kind of went with that for a while. But I still hear that enough that I'm trying to kind of transition away and eventually maybe, I don't know, do like A.L. Griffith or Lee Griffith or something. But just kind of trying to transition right now to my own name, so I'm not, getting confused with anyone else I shouldn't even be confused with. So, that's all.
So
pretty
we
much,
should.
yeah.
So all of the Matlock jokes that we had lined up for today, we should just file those.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it if you skip those.
Right, let me just update my script.
It's just one of those, it's not even like, I don't even like dislike. It's not that I even necessarily dislike that actor or anything. It's just something I've heard a few too many times,
It is completely fair to not want to have your career and work mixed up with someone else, whether or not they're in comics, whether or not they're your age, whether or not they're on this continent.
Whether or not they're the front man of Crowded House.
Yeah.
Oh wow,
yeah.
yes. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, see, I know a lot of people that have that problem. Like, I know a few people named Chris Evans, the same as Captain America and stuff. So it's like, um, it happens.
I really want people when they Google me to find me. But on IMDb, I'm Tim Finn, Roman numeral 2. So, Mark,
Okay.
I have an opening question for Andrew. Andrew, so I first discovered your work in comics as a reader of IDW's sublime Transformers run. How did
Okay.
you get to How did you get to IDW?
Okay, well, yeah, that's a story in and of itself. So, I had always done art and stuff as a kid, and I was always wanted to pursue a creative field, especially if it was something where I could like draw, whether it was in like animation or comics or something. And I was an avid comics reader. I grew up with, all the stuff that we're going to be talking about and Transformers as well. And once I got married, I kind of was at home more, and I found myself drawing more again. And I started, finding internet groups, whether it's like fandom sites or whether it was DeviantArt and things. And I started posting my art, and it started getting noticed. And IDW hosted a contest through it was kind of run by some fans, but also in partnership with IDW to be the next Transformers comic artist. I guess cover artist specifically to start with. But anyway, I think there were like 500 people who took part and first you know, submitted art for the first round. There were like 3 or 4 rounds, and each round different people got eliminated. And I actually won like first place in the first 2 rounds. And then on the third round, I placed maybe like, I don't know, fifth or sixth out of like 10. And the top three were supposed to get passed on to IDW. But I still did well enough that like I started getting occasional emails and things from people at IDW, and they were like, you know, asking about certain things. And then I got announced on a book, like I mentioned earlier, with my name before I had a choice on how I would be credited. That book never came out. It was a Spotlight Cosmos, but it kind of got announced a little prematurely and never happened. And then, so that didn't happen, and I kind of stalled for a bit. And then I just got an email randomly from the editor in chief, Chris Ryle, and he was like, "Hey, do you draw movie Transformers at all?" And at that point, I hadn't. So I kind of rushed some sketches out overnight and sent them to him. And not too much long later, I got offered to help ink one of the Transformers movie tie-in comics, and then that led to me doing some fill-in art on that. And then the next thing I knew, I was doing like my own pages on like a short story that tied into All Hail Megatron, and then it led into me doing my first series of my own, which was Foundation, which John Barber wrote, and then I drew, and that's kind of where it started, and it just kind of went from there.
Amazing, and it's a lot of Transformers body of work. Do you know how many issues it's totaled up to?
I don't. I sometimes think I should stop and count it up, but so I did a few issues of like the tie-in comics, like I don't know, inking and fill-in pages and stuff, and then I did 4 issues of Foundation, and then they were starting a new ongoing, and they liked what John and I were doing together, so they invited me onto that, and that was like I was the main artist for like 55 issues before they relaunched it, but I didn't do all the
Wow.
issues. There were a good amount of fill-in issues and things, and I did some of like Dark Cybertron and stuff in the meantime, and a few things here and there. So I really don't know. And then I did like the Bumblebee movie prequel comic, and I did different things here and there, fill in issues and things. So I don't know. It's got to be maybe like 100 or close to it.
Wow, you must. It's like you must be like the SL Gallant equivalent of GI Joe in terms of that body of
Well, I
work.
don't know. I mean, there are people who've done a lot more than me, like Alex Milne and other people like that that have been around at least as long as myself, if not longer, because he specifically has been there since the Dreamwave days in the 2000s. So and then he did more than meets the eye while I was doing RID, and he's done a few crossovers and things since then. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm the top place, but it would be interesting to see how many issues each artist has done. That's for sure.
Is it? I hesitate to ask this question because I think it's a dumb question. But having drawn as a ninth grader, having drawn Transformers fan comics, and then more recently drawn comics of my own with humans, do you prefer drawing something like Transformers with giant alien robots, or GI Joe, something with 6 foot tall anatomical humans?
I prefer the humans actually. It's less time consuming. That you need less reference because like I tell people a lot of times, every human has basically the same anatomy. I mean, some people might be thinner or heavier or shorter or or have weight at different places in their bodies and things, but like everybody has the same basic like skeletal and muscular system. You can kind of have the same starting point for every person. But with Transformers, it's like if somebody turns into a car with wheels hanging off of them, that's entirely different than somebody who's got like jet parts or a tank parts or something. It's like so every Transformer has a different like you have to look up so much reference, and they each have their own kind of anatomy sort of, and a lot of like using a straight roller and stuff. So it's a lot more time consuming, and I find people, I don't know, like they can be challenging in their own way, and it's hard too because a lot of times I kind of want to go faster, but then it looks kind of rushed. So I have to force myself to take more time and focus on the subtleties because like a lot of the tricky part with drawing humans is the folds and the contours and things that aren't quite angular, and you have to be kind of subtle and use some hatching and stuff to get the form right. But like so there are certain subtleties to humans that are harder too. So, but then I've been drawing humans and things for a while now, and like I just kind of went back to I'm working on some Transformers projects at the moment, and it is kind of nice to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know how to do this. I can slide back into this pretty easily.
I've sometimes thought when reading Transformers comics that the person who's drawing Spider-Man is at an advantage because you can draw Spider-Man sort of over the shoulder. We can just see a little bit of the sort of rear 3/4 back of his head and his shoulder, and you know who it is and where you are.
Sure.
But if you're drawing like Roadbuster, right, from like over the shoulder behind his ear, not even 80% of Transformers fans may not know sort of where the camera is and who it's overlooking, right? Like Optimus Prime, I know that shoulder, I know that head.
Right. Well, that's the other thing too is like I get kind of self-conscious about fans. I'm always afraid fans are gonna say, "Oh, that's not exactly right," or that little chunk of metal there should be a 1/4 inch over to the left, or it shouldn't be there, or whatever. That's too much kibble or whatever. So yeah, that's always in the back of my mind too. So I take extra time to try to make sure that they're drawn accurately.
Do you have training in art or in comics?
Well, yeah, in art, I went to my college or university days were spent doing art. I had a concentration in studio arts, but then I focused on graphic design because I thought that would be a more reliable work path, and it was for a while. But yeah, so I took like figure drawing and traditional painting classes and printmaking and all of that kind of stuff, and yeah, so I have an arts degree.
Cool.
And I guess in terms of bringing this back to GI Joe, a lot of creators come to GI Joe as fans and having been fan of the property in their youth, and some people come to it knowing a little less about it. I think a lot of people, particularly a lot of Americans of kind of our generation, couldn't help but avoid GI Joe being in their life in terms of the popularity of the comics, the toys, and the cartoon. So yeah, where did GI Joe place in the life of a young Andrew Lee Griffith?
It was pretty pivotal actually. When I was young, I was at the age where like I was born around the time that Star Wars came out. So I grew up. My older brother had a lot of the Star Wars toys, the little 3.75 inch, right? Yeah, figures. So I was starting to get them for Christmas gifts and birthday gifts and things. And then on my 6th birthday, I guess I'm aging myself here, but I I I got as a gift. Well, I had seen them at stores, and I was pretty excited about like when G.I. Joe first came out. And I'd go to the local department store that had a big toy section, and they had on the end in America, I guess we call them end caps. I don't know what you might call them in the UK, but at the end there's like a display where at the time they would have toys out of the package behind like this plastic thing where they'd have them set up incorrectly set up, of course, but like these little battle scenes set up, and with Snake Eyes and the Mobat and Scarlet and all the figures and stuff, and I was entranced by that. And then I just something about I don't know, because there were other like military toys that were similar at the time, like cheap plastic army figures and stuff. But there was just something about these GI Joe toys that kind of got my attention and enthralled me. So my parents knew that, and on my birthday, I got on my sixth birthday, I got Snake Eyes, the Mobat, and the MMS system with Hawk, and I was just kind of hooked from there. And that was, obviously a couple of years before Transformers. And my cousins, my cousins were a little bit older than me, and they started getting the comics. So when I'd go over their house, I'd read some of the early issues. And I think my first issue was, oh, was it? Where did they go? I forget if they went. They ran into the October Guard, and there was the all-terrain big vehicle they were carrying that like something explosive. I'm trying to remember the details of the issue, but they were kind of was it
Yeah,
Trucial Absimia?
that was like issue.
9, 7,
Is
or 8,
that
or
that was
9?
really early on, right? Like like 6 or something like that.
But yeah, that was I think the first GI Joe issue that either I remember reading all the way through or owning myself. I'm trying to remember, but yeah, that was a big issue for me that kind of got me hooked on the comics. And then no, I'm sorry, I never owned that one because the first one I owned was like my brother and I went to the store and he got Transformers issue 1 and I got GI Joe like 24, 25. So up until that point, I had read
Uh-huh.
other people's comics, and I finally bought my first GI Joe comic. It was like when they were in the swamps with Zartan
Yeah.
and Storm Shadow was being taken to Alcatraz with Roadblock and stuff, and that was when I finally got into comics. But I had of course been hooked on the cartoon, and that would come on, and I believe at the time it was in the mornings before I'd go to school. But yeah, so I was like pretty much hooked from the start, and I started collecting the toys, and I actually collected GI Joe toys like up through the early 90s, like after I had stopped with Transformers, because I had a paper route pretty much
Uh-huh.
just so I could afford to make some of my own money delivering newspapers. That was a thing, kids, at the time that was existed newspapers. So so yeah, I had money to pretty much go out to the Toys R Us or the department store, and whenever my parents would take me, and I'd buy like pretty much all the G.I. Joe toys I wanted. So I had a pretty big collection, and I guess I still do.
Nice.
So I was in it from the start, and I was pretty much raised on Larry Hama's G.I. Joe comics.
Excellent. And you've held on to your collection then, and has it made its way to Peru?
No, I have a house in the U.S. I'm from the U.S. And so I have a house there and have it up in the attic. So whenever I
Uh-huh.
settle back there, I'm anxious to kind of like dig it out and maybe see what I have and set some stuff up in my office, especially now that I've officially worked on the brand more.
Excellent. And so how far did you sort of keep on following the brand? Did you sort of try and stay abreast as it kind of evolved over the years with the kind of the Devil's Due era, and then IDW getting the license and the sort of the 25th anniversary kind of line of toys and all of these different iterations, or did you kind of for the most part leave it there when once you'd stopped your paper out?
Well, I don't know. Like I graduated high school, and of course, you get into dating, and like you go off to college. And like I said, I was going to school for art, and I got kind of snobby about it. I kind of was closeted about my geekery, so I didn't like collect comics and stuff for a while. But then I got a job. I got a job in the early 2000s working at like a large graphic design house where there were like at least 100 other graphic designers there. We were designing advertisements for all across the country and the world and stuff as part of a big corporation. But there were a lot of artists working there. So people would have, Transformers sitting on their desk shelves and GI Joe toys, and that was around the time that Dreamwave came out with Transformers, and it was huge. I mean, I remember being on South Street in Philadelphia where I was living at the time, and like you'd see big posters of like the Pat Lee Optimus Prime, and this is like a bohemian, like artsy, nightlife area, and it was a huge thing at the time. So we all went out and bought the Transformers comic, and then that led to like He-Man and GI Joe getting revitalized and stuff like that. So I did read a bit of the Devil's Due GI Joe, but I don't know. I got back into comics and stuff, but I don't remember the Devil's do one clicking with me that much. I read some of the crossovers with Transformers and stuff that they did. And then once IDW got the license, and I was really like at that point, because I was working on Transformers and stuff, and I was really back into comics and getting inspired and stuff. So when they got the license, I picked up their G.I. Joe run pretty much immediately and kind of read it from the start. But I always had, always had an affection for it.
Andrew, if you have followed the IDW G.I. Joe comics and you read the comics in the 80s and that Larry Hama work meant something to you, how did it take you so long to draw an issue for IDW written by Larry Hama?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask the editors. I bugged them for a long time. I did do like a cover or two over the years. Maybe more. I don't remember exactly how many, but I did like a Snake Eyes cover when they relaunched G.I. Joe back when they were doing like the Revolution thing, I think it was. I did like a cover for the first issue and things, and there are a few things I did like for Hasbro behind the scenes here and there, toy designs and stuff. I don't remember if I did G.I. Joe specifically, but I did like there are all kinds of things that get like tested out just in sketch form and stuff, and they take to meetings and they're like, we need a quick sketch of like this G.I. Joe Transformers crossover or like a his tank transforming, or little random things probably here and there that I did, but nothing that ever came to fruition, and I don't know if I can even show it, but like so that's a lot of the Hasbro stuff I did every year over the years. Was I'd get an email and they'd be like, can you sketch this out by tomorrow morning so I can take it into this meeting, and it might never go anywhere, but I need something to show. So but I never really did.
So you did a version of the Baroness and Ravage.
That was for a commission. That was a commission. So yeah, I don't know. Like I would bug the other editors now and then. I don't know if part of it was the fact that I was busy with Transformers and I was, committed to an ongoing series for a few years there. But part of it might be timing. Part of it might be there. Like Shannon or S.L. Gallant, he was such a consistent artist for such a long time that they didn't really need somebody on the Real American Hero book. So I think part of it might be timing. Part of it might be, because editors get so many different artists writing them, saying, hey, do you have anything? And coming up to them at conventions. And you have to be the right person at the right time. And I don't know. Finally, last year, like during the pandemic, like when everything was locked down, I was doing a lot more commissions for people and mailing them out. And for some reason, I just started getting more G.I. Joe commissions. And Tom Waltz, the editor, was like, hey, these are looking really good. And I was like, well, I'd still love to do G.I. Joe sometime. And then what was I on? I was working on something last year and it ended. And I just put out some feelers to different editors and some different companies and stuff. And I was like, hey, I'm looking, for work and trying to figure out what's next. And I got an email from Tom. He's like, hey, would you like to do a 5-issue run on G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, featuring a new character and all this stuff? And I'm like, yes. So yeah, I was super happy to get that work. But as far as like why it took so long, I really don't know the behind the scenes answer.
I'm slightly needling you with the phrasing of that question. But I understand the phenomenon of right person, right time, and editors sometimes having their pick. So of those 5 issues in that 5-part story, you took a break for the 3rd chapter, and the 5th issue of your run got pushed to this one we're talking about today. Was that a scheduling thing that you didn't draw the 3rd issue of Murder by Assassination?
No, I was originally supposed to do the full first 5 issues, but and this is not at all to like call out Larry in any way. I love the guy and I love his work, but like he was being a little slow with some of the scripts. So like I'd have an issue done, and then I'd have to wait a few weeks until I got the next story instead of just jumping right into the next one. And it got to a point where things had fallen behind, and just how it was, Like I said, I'm not calling anybody out or anything, but like it just got to a point where in order to keep the book on schedule, I had to start the 4th chapter, and they had Shannon fill in on the 3rd issue just so they could both be going at the same time to keep things going on track. And then they just pushed me back to a standalone issue. So that's all it was. It was just things were got falling a bit behind, and just how they managed to keep things on schedule.
Ordinarily, when an announced artist on an arc doesn't do all the issues, I'd be disappointed. But that Shannon already had such a body of G.I. Joe work that issue was different, and that he did such a good job made that, as a reader, actually fun and like not an interruption. So I don't ask that question from a place of criticism or disappointment.
And it looked great too. Like, I mean, that was some of my favorite work of his I've seen him do. Like, and we were in communication a good bit about that, off and on. Like, unfortunately, like I had started on the next issue, and like some of his, like the designs for his characters were different than I expected to use. Like, for example, I had drawn Chuckles on a cover, and I was picturing him kind of more like a Daniel Craig, kind of short hair, kind of like undercover guy, and like he drew him as like Owen Wilson or something, and like with longish hair,
Yeah.
and so like I had to kind of go back and redo how I was drawing him and stuff like that, and so there's a little bit, but like once we finally got talking, we got talking a good bit and sharing art back and forth and things, and like he kind of inspired me. I was like, wow, man, your stuff's looking so good. I'm feeling a little intimidated. I got to step it up on the next couple issues. So, but that was just it. Like those issues were on such a tight deadline. I pretty much had to do like each issue within 30 days, and then which I did pretty well keeping up with. But then I'd be a little ahead of Larry, and then I'd have to wait on the story a bit. So unfortunately, I couldn't keep ahead, so it kind of started to fall behind a little bit. So that was all. I mean,
We speculated at the time that potentially you had a bit more time for the very first issue of the arc, just because of the level of polish and the detail and all of those big action scenes in the desert with all of those different vehicles and stuff. It looked like it had a lot of time spent on it to do that. Would that be a fair assessment, that you had a bit longer for that particular issue?
yeah, I had a little more lead time on that one, and yeah, for sure, because there's a lot of detail on that with like the
We've got a bit of lag, so just keep on going if we're talking. Don't
Andrew,
worry.
can you talk about your process? Because when I look at your art, I think I'm seeing only pencils that have been darkened in Photoshop. I don't think I'm seeing inks, or if I'm seeing inks, like just some inking on outlines.
no, definitely not. Everything's inked. Yeah.
Oh, well,
I
I
hope
stand.
that's not. I hope. Yeah, no, I everything was hand inked. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what gives that impression. Maybe because I don't know. Maybe I ink too much like a penciler. I don't know.
I stand corrected. I think I have seen the occasional line. I think I see the occasional line which looks like a pencil line that hasn't been fully erased. So, like in the new issue in 286, it's like page 6 or so, where Tommy's holding the tray of food and he's looking back at Snake Eyes, and he says, "I don't need anybody fighting my battles for me." And there's a very thin light line next to his head that to me looks like, and I mean, I like the look of pencils darkened and then colored directly in comics. So this is also not a criticism, because I like sort of seeing the artist's hand. I don't need my comics art to be like 100% crisp and clean, although there are plenty of artists who do that I like. But I stand corrected. All right, this is all inked.
No, there is for sure that I know when I scan things in, a lot of times, like I'll try to do my best to get rid of any stray pencil marks that are still there. But there have been times for sure where like I'll look at it on a different monitor screen or something with a different brightness or a different calibration, and I'm like, oh shoot, that was not showing up on my desktop screen. I'm pretty sure, but like I'll notice those things later. So yeah, sometimes stray pencil marks do make it through, unfortunately. But yeah, those are just mistakes that, because like it's hard once you've got the inks and you still have pencil marks showing and you want to erase them. You don't want to like rub off the inking and things. So sometimes it's still kind of faintly there, and you have to go into Photoshop and like work with the levels and the contrast a bit. But yeah, I do miss some stuff sometimes. So that's just honest mistakes.
And what's your general kind of approach and techniques and the tools, and in particular, I guess one of the things maybe to talk about is around sort of your inking approach, because we noticed that you tend to ink with quite a fine line, quite a lot of detail there. Our guess was maybe small, thin micron pens or that kind of thing. And while you're discussing that as well, you're a penciler who's inking yourself, which is obviously a slower process than just sort of pencils and then handing it off to an inker. What was that? What's your thought process about wanting to do your own inks?
Well, I don't really think of myself as like an inker, but like IDW tends to like people who can pencil and ink their own stuff, which it's always a thing of like, to me, like I always feel like every page I do, I'm like I can do that better, but you have to find the balance of like quality versus time, because you have to get a whole issue done penciling and inking. You can only spend so much time on a page, so it's like, how much time can I put into this and have it be presentable enough that it's good, that that it's going to look good and hold up, but also not spend too much time. So you have to find the balance of how much time you can put into each page. So I started out with pencils. I like to use I have like I think it's pronounced Stadler mechanical pencil for like a drafting pencil, because I can keep a nice sharp point with it. And I like to do my layouts like right on the page. Like I don't know. So lately I've actually started doing like on smaller pages with like some pencils and markers and stuff, and I've been kind of transitioning into that more, but I always like just doing it right on the page, getting right into it. And then I go over it with, tighter lines and things. And a lot of times, I'll skip like a lot of the fine details in the penciling stage and just do it on the inks. So if there's like something that has a vent with like a lot of parallel lines, I might just do all of those with the inks. Trees and things, I might put in the details with the leaves just on the inks, and the shadows and stuff I'll leave, just to save time, because it's so time's precious when you're penciling and inking. So yeah, a lot of that stuff I'll do in the inking stage. And I used to use the micron pens a lot, but I kind of prefer now Copic. I used their markers for a long time, and I got into using their multi-liner pens, which are like the similar equivalent to the microns, but the nibs and the ink are all refillable and replaceable. So I can just keep using the same housing or whatever for the pen. They're very similar, but I like the quality of them. I like the consistency of the ink and stuff. So I've been using those for the last 5 or 6 years, ever since, boy, I'm trying to think, like about after Dark Cybertron, if you're familiar with the Transformers issue, somewhere around there, I switched to these. So yeah, that's what I do, and then I draw everything by hand. I scan it in. I do very little manipulation digitally, except for like I said, contrast. I clean up the borders and the edges and things, but I do very little art digitally. Every once in a while, I have to fix something, but I like to keep it traditional. A lot of people like to buy the original art and stuff, and I like how it looks all inked and complete. I don't know. So that's kind of my process in a nutshell.
Can you talk about what reference you were provided for this issue, 286? Sure.
So Larry actually is really good at providing reference. Every time I start an issue, they've uploaded folders with like the specific guns that people are using in the issue, what the bivouacs or little campsites will look like in Vietnam and things, and like even what the like different types of uniforms for the medics, or the LRP guys and stuff. And it's amazing. Like he'll have 5 pictures he'll upload of a certain helicopter and stuff, and so he provides a lot of reference, like mostly photos you can find online and things, but it's really helpful. And then he also sent along some sketches that he had done. I don't know if these were older sketches or sketches he did for this issue, but they were used, I think, as a variant cover. At least one of them were for this issue.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so he sent me a couple of those. I didn't know whether I could share them with you or not. I don't know if those are supposed to be public, the other ones he sent me, or if they want to use them for covers in the future or anything, because a lot of times they'll do that, with his sketches. So yeah, it was a lot of that. And then of course I used issues 26, 27, and 44 or 43 of the original run, the ones where they showed the flashbacks originally for that time period in Vietnam and stuff. So
Yeah.
I used a lot of those as reference too. Yeah, so it was a combination of what he had sent me, my own personal research online, and then old issues. But this issue was surprisingly challenging in that regard because I did do a lot of research. Just I wanted to get it right, I wanted to be faithful to
Mm.
what it would actually have looked like, and I know Larry has a lot of personal history with that, so I didn't want to like do it any injustice. So I spent a lot of time like making sure I had uniforms right and details of the helicopters and everything and the machine guns and things. Like I just wanted to make sure everything was as authentic as it could be.
We've talked about how this comic, more than a lot of other comics, is a challenge for its artists in terms of reference because Joes and Cobras have so many specific costumes, and then the vehicles are all hard to draw and like weird fictionalized things. And then you get an issue that's like not dependent upon like a Cobra hiss tank, and it's like, oh well, it's it's like 1968, and there are all these very specific guns and uniforms and like small huts that need to be accurate.
For sure.
Harder, if anything, because you can't just go onto yojo.com and find the figure. You've got, this is like military history reference, and
Yeah,
people are certain people are going to be having a laser eye for accuracy on this, aren't they?
for sure. Yeah, because it's not, because a lot of Joe fans are fans of military history and stuff, and they know that stuff better than I do. So
Or have served themselves.
yeah, better, and then there's a whole level of fandom that people like to see things the way they expect to see it. At least I know I do. I can be kind of particular too when I read comics and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look right, or that that's not how it should look, and I always point out those things myself, so I can't I can't judge that, that's for sure. So yeah, I like to do my best to make it look how it should look.
So Larry writes in this particular plot style, the Marvel method style. How did you get on with that generally? And did this issue feel any different to the previous four that you're drawn? Because it's obviously a very personal story. So did that did that come across in the writing as well?
It did kind of feel different. It felt more challenging. It felt more like, for some reason, this issue took me the longest. I kept having to ask them to extend the deadline. I mean, like, it was one of those things where it started out and they're like, if we push you back to a spotlight issue, we have these different spotlights coming up. Is there any particular character you'd want to work on? And I was like, man, I'd love to do like a Storm Shadow issue. I was imagining like ninja stuff, maybe something that tied into like, I don't know, if it would have been up to me originally, I would have pitched like an idea where like I'd always love to see more of the silent interlude issue and like how Scarlet got captured and stuff. And if that has been covered in another issue, I may have missed it somewhere. But I haven't read every single issue throughout the years. But so I don't know. I really would love to have done some old school like Storm Shadow Snake Eyes stuff. But then when they sent me the script or the plot, and it was like totally different than I was picturing, I was like, oh wow, it kind of threw me. I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool too, because like those issues that told the backstory of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and all those, Stalker and everybody and Nam and stuff were like, to me, very influential, very like impactful stories of the 80s, and kind of took G.I. Joe from being this like, I don't know, franchise comic into something more serious and more, inspired, and like just felt more authentic.
Yeah.
And it really kind of gave it so much more depth. And I just loved that old stuff with Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes and Zartan and Soft Master and all that kind of stuff. Those issues, man, I love those issues with like the subway and the fight on the subway and all that stuff. They raised the elevated train, and the elevated train cover with him getting kicked out of it is still like one of my favorite comic covers ever. Just so much detail, and like having the confidence to use the figure so small on the cover and have the composition work where like, because the tendency is always like, if you draw a character small on the cover, it feels like they're not going to be impactful enough, but like it just works so well with the composition and the detail and everything. I love that cover. But anyway, So yeah, when I got the script, I was like, okay, this is different than I expected. But then, when I read it and realized how much Larry was putting into it from his own personal thing, I'm like, and having so much history of those backstories, where it was like, yeah, this is really an honor to work on this. So I really wanted to try to get it as right as I could, because I wasn't there at that time period. I wasn't in Vietnam or anything. So like all I can do is my best to research it and everything. And now I forget the original question. I'm sorry.
Marvel method.
Oh yeah, sure. So once the plot came in, you were asking if that issue felt different than the other issues, right? So that's kind of what led me down that path. But
Yeah.
so yeah, it did feel a bit different than the other issues in that it felt more personal and more tied into the older G.I. Joe stuff that I grew up loving. But as far as the Marvel method, like I love working that way. John Barber and I worked on that way, on Transformers that way for like, I don't know. I think after Dark Cybertron, we kind of took the characters to Earth. I think he started doing the Marvel kind of method plot way there. So I'm kind of used to that. I kind of prefer that. It certainly gives me more freedom, more room to, make storytelling choices and stuff. And that's one of the reasons I like working in comics, is that I like the storytelling aspect. So yeah, that's been a great way to work. I love working on that way.
Excellent. And talking story, what was kind of, the bulk of your work was on this murder by assassination arc. What was your first inklings as to what that overall story might be, and sort of was the original pitch of the story very different to how it turned out? And specifically, we've kind of speculated on the fact that we didn't really in the end have a murder by assassination, other than the death of the senator in the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. The first email I got from Tom was like, basically, okay, so this is going to be a plot that's going to be kind of like Larry's, the closest probably Larry will get to like a murder mystery kind of a storyline, and it's going to focus on a new character named Sherlock, who I guess Tom had pitched to him. I think he said it was based on someone he had served with or something. So yeah, so like it started with that, and it's not too different. I mean, it was never expected to be like a large scale. Like it was going to be, different from like the Snake Hunt. It wasn't going to be like hundreds of characters. Thank God, it wasn't going to be like hundreds of characters to draw and hundreds of vehicles to draw and stuff. So originally it was going to start with like her origin story, and then be more of like a kind of a lower key story with like a murder mystery kind of thing with a limited amount of characters. So yeah, I mean, there was a part of me that like I want to be drawing Rattlers and his tanks and Trouble Bubbles and stuff, but then I got into the story. But so it was cool by the time 285 came around, I could draw like a Stinger and some of the more the bats and stuff. So like it was fun to get an element of that too, of the classic characters, more of the classic characters that I always loved and stuff. And I did get to draw, Mindbender and Cobra Commander and Duke and all that. So that was some of my favorite stuff in that one issue, where it would cut back to the basis. Because how can you not love drawing like the classic posing Cobra Commander with his fist in the air and stuff? So yeah, I mean, it was a nice mix of like drawing like the authentic like military stuff, and I talked a lot to a friend of mine who he did a couple tours in Iraq in the mid 2000s, so he was a great reference. When I didn't have time to like wait on a response from Larry, I could just message him and be like, hey, what does this specific radio look like, or is this how the inside of a Hummer would have looked, or how would the base have been laid out and stuff. So he was good with a lot of that kind of stuff. It's good to have a close friend that I could go to for reference and stuff. But
inside of a Hummer on Deadline, I think you just ink it all black.
Yeah, there was a good bit of that. Oh, for sure. Oh,
a lot of shadows.
For sure. Yeah, there was a lot of shadow on the inside and stuff. But it was nice when he read the issue. He sent me a message. He's like, "Wow, that took me back to like riding around the desert and the inside of a Hummer." Is like I feel like I'm back there. I was like, that was a compliment. Yeah.
Andrew, your comment about wanting to draw more established characters and vehicles, I hear you. I open up an issue and I want to see Stingers and Dr. Mindbender. And the sort of counter to that is, if it's all the established stuff or flashbacks, we're not as like fans and as the creators building or getting like new mythology. And this comic is this really unusual beast, which is that it's a nostalgia property. And unlike the 80s and 90s, there aren't new characters and toys that are being handed over from Hasbro that have to be inserted. And so Larry and company like do have the freedom to not introduce new characters. And Mark and I I think a lot of fans have really enjoyed these new characters. All that said, I loved 286. I found it really powerful. And I think you are fortunate and in kind of a rarefied air now in that you have drawn not just a good issue of G.I. Joe, but one of these infrequent mythology issues. Like, we know more about some of these favorite characters because of 2021, 26, 27, 144, and others, and now 286. And this is an issue I could hand to a lapsed fan and say, why aren't you reading G.I. Joe?
Oh, that's great to hear. It means a lot. I mean, yeah, my older brother kind of pointed that out to me. Like I said earlier, he was into this stuff too when I was young, and he was like, "Oh, he's like, you realize how cool it is that you're getting to like work on an issue that ties into such a, legendary mythos of this comic from the 80s and stuff, and with such a long history." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. I mean, I hadn't acknowledged it a little bit in my head, but when other people point it out, it really kind of it brings it home, So yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel really lucky to have gotten to work on that. Absolutely.
And it's not even a 3-page scene, right? Panel 2.
Yeah, it's a whole issue. Yep.
Panel 2 on page 1. I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be a whole issue of this.
Right. Yeah, because like characters like Ramon and stuff had shown up for a few panels here and there and gotten killed and things, and but you finally get to flesh them out a bit, and see how they interact with Tommy and Snake Eyes on the base and things, and what the dynamic is like, and puts a bit more flesh on the bone, and see who else they lost that you hadn't seen before and things. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
This issue also served as a nice counterpoint, not to take anything away from the G.I. Joe movie that was released this summer, but since that went in such a different direction. I think I sort of passively wondered if the comic might not do any more Vietnam flashbacks. And here we get an entire issue of one, which is very much about these two characters who were in that movie that we saw this summer. So for another reason, this issue had a special resonance. Like, oh yeah, we can still go back there.
Yes. No, I was just going to say the same thing. I always have the fear of like when comics feel too indebted to like the movies, and like they have to change everything to follow the movies, and stuff, and they have to stop. I don't know. I don't like when they like spit out the old continuity just because, even if it doesn't make sense in that same comic book to do what the movie's doing. So I'm really glad that they tied it back to the original continuity, and that adds a lot more depth and everything, in my opinion.
There were two great points made there. That specifically these flashbacks before have been, such high points in the story, but have only seen them as sort of the odd panels here and there. So just to have an entire issue devoted to this era and really fleshing it out and giving it room to breathe just feels great and a real treat. But also Tim's point, the fact that if we've got any lapsed G.I. Joe readers out there who aren't reading the current issues, but do have that enormous nostalgia for the likes of issue 26, hand them this issue, and it's and let them know what they're missing out on. It's a great advert for what IDW
now
are
there
doing.
is there's one thing about this issue, and Andrew, it does not involve your contribution. There's one thing about this issue which makes it a little harder to hand to a lapsed fan, which I will get to after Mark does his plot breakdown. Period. I'm going to end that sentence right there.
Okay, well done, Tim. I was just going to loop back to a point that you were kind of mentioning before about how how it's nice to work on the classic characters, but there were some brand new characters created in that last Murder by Assassination arc, at almost staggering rate given the age of this property. We had, in particular, I'd single out Al Calbra, Sherlock, and also the new Overkill character introduced, with a great deal of mystery behind him. Maybe Andrew, if you can talk us through sort of some of the creation process for these new characters, and also how as a artist following the scripts as they're given to you, what were your own speculations on the mystery of Al Calbra? Did you think that he might be an established Cobra character, and how did you feel about the reveal when it came?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like I said, I knew from the start that one of the main new characters was going to be Sherlock and everything. So Larry had sent a sketch of what she looked like in her regular military MP fatigues, but that wasn't going to be how she would be seen going forward. He wanted more of like a undercover plainclothes kind of detective kind of a look. So I got to design that, which was really great. I mean, it's really cool to design a character and have Larry approve it and say, "Oh, it looks great," So started from there. That was kind of like the starting point, and then so going forward, I'm trying to think of what character. Were there any other new characters in 281?
Al Calbra?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. So yeah, Larry gave like a general description of what he pictured him looking like with the whole head wrapping, and I believe he did point out that he'd be wearing aviator glasses to hide his eyes and stuff. And then he said he'd have like bandoliers of grenades around him and stuff. And I think I was pretty much able to run with the rest of it and figure out how he'd look. In my mind, I didn't know who he was supposed to be. I don't know I think Larry was kind of hedging a bit, like waiting to see I don't know when he decided who he was going to be, So in my mind, I was kind of hoping it would end up being Major Blood, because I'd like to see him make his way back, and because I always wanted to draw him, because I always liked him as a villain, because he was kind of like goofy and threatening at the same time, especially sometimes he's been portrayed in comics as being really ruthless and kind of almost scary, But then in the old cartoons, he was always so goofy and almost like the I don't know, I don't know, like the kid brother to Destro and Baroness or something that they pick on and toss aside. In the old comics and stuff, But there's something about him. I just always liked his look as he almost felt like a Star Wars bounty hunter or something, with this robot arm and his armor and stuff. But so I was kind of hoping it would be him, and I didn't know who it was going to be. So yeah, so got to introduce him in that issue, and then 282. It wasn't clear who the bad guys were. Of course, it was a Fred series guy, and then it was the guy all in that was very specifically a Larry, description. He was in a fedora with a trench coat and everything, and you be very vague about who he was. And then of course James was the one who decided to color him all I think he was a dark gray kind of look. But no, that was a great issue too, because I got to draw some of the classic characters at the Senate hearing and everything. So that was great, because of course I love Hawk and Stalker and all those characters. So Scarlet and everything. I'm trying to think. And then 283, of course, there were a number of new characters, but that was all Shannon. He designed them and introduced them.
Yep.
So I just kind of ran with that. And then by the time we got to 280, did 284 I don't think had anyone new, did they? It had a lot of street thugs and things that Larry would call out, wanted to be authentic to the area, what organized crime guys would look like and how they dress and everything. So he provided a lot of reference photos for those guys, that his henchmen and stuff. And then in 285, I'm trying to think. Yeah, so Overkill, that was a little interesting, because in the script, in the plot, it just said Overkill. It just said Overkill does this, Overkill does that. I'm like, well, which version of Overkill is this? I'm like, he hasn't really appeared in IDW, has he? So
yeah.
Yeah, so we went back and forth a lot, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Diana Davis. She's the research assistant on these books.
Yep, big friend of the show.
Oh, good, because I don't know if she gets enough credit, because she was always very hands-on, messaging me all the time. Do you need anything? Like, do you need to look anything up? If I'd be like, when's the last time this character appeared? Or, has this character appeared before? She'd be like, oh, wow, even I have to do some research. And she'd go back and like dig through old issues and get me images and things. So she was great. So I was asking her about Overkill, and she's like, well, me personally, she's like, I like this version, or there was this version, but she's like, I don't think Larry liked that version. So we came to this point where I'm like, well, what if I just kind of come up with an original design, kind of like taking influence from different versions that have appeared. And I did up a sketch and colored it and stuff, and I sent it off to them. And Larry's like, yeah, that looks great. And like I said earlier about Sherlock, I was like, that's a great feeling to have a chance to introduce a new character and have Larry like give it his full seal of approval. So yeah, that was pretty much just the story with Overkill. Just at first, I was like, wow, what should he look like? So it was a little bit of back and forth for a while until we got to a point where I just did a new design and he approved it. And then as far as the reveal, yeah, I don't know. It kind of made sense. I wasn't expecting like some stereotypical Middle Eastern guy, to be underneath there. I figured it was going to be some recognizable face or established face, and I think a Fred series kind of makes sense because there's room there where it could be a number of different, Freds over the history, or it could be a new one. And I don't remember, did the end of the issue specifically say if it was a specific one?
It's a Fred.
Fred. Okay, yeah, okay.
I have two reactions to your answer to the previous set of questions. One, that you got to come up with a new take on Overkill. That statement, and then the issue as published, right? The statement that launched 1,000 cosplays, right? And action figure customs. I can't wait to see in a month, in a year, in 5 years, photos of people at conventions dressed up as that version of Overkill. And then number two, Tom Waltz and Megan Brown, editors at IDW, if you're listening, Andrew Lee Griffith really wants to draw a Major Blood story. So if that could be a spotlight issue, or maybe a backup in our like quadruple sized issue 300 next year, or I'm hoping there's going to be a quadruple sized March 2022 40th anniversary issue. Maybe we can turn that month's issue into like 4 issues, the way that who did that? Gen 13 turned its 13th issue into 3 separate issues, and Dark Horse Presents turned its 100th issue into 4 or 5 separate issues. So Andrew Lee Griffith really wants to draw a Major Blood story.
There we go, mic drop.
That's appreciated. Actually, I don't think Megan's on G.I. Joe anymore. I think she moved over just the other day to a new young adult original comics line, I think. I'm not sure if she's still on G.I. Joe. I've been meaning to ask that.
I can rephrase this, and I can say, hey, Talking Joe listeners, it's time to start up a short email addressed to letters@idwpublishing.com, subject line, G.I. Joe, Dear Tom Waltz, I would love to see Andrew Lee Griffith draw an entire Major Blood spotlight issue. However, if it's a backup in one of next year's oversized anniversary issues, that would also be great. Sincerely, Joe Fan in Spokane.
Or if anybody excuse me, if anybody is a fan of what I've done on these books and wants to let IDW know, please always feel free. And of course, if you didn't like it, you're welcome to use your free speech too. But either way. But I'd love to do more work. So if you want to see me on more stuff, just let them know.
And in the letter page, Tom writes, many thanks to artist Andrew Lee Griffith, who signs off his art duties, brackets, for now, with what I consider his best issue yet. So the for now does sound optimistic.
Well, you can't say anything's definite, but there's been at least one thing that he's talked to me about doing that I'm really excited to do if it works out next year as part of the 40th anniversary. So hopefully, fingers crossed.
You know, Andrew, say no more. If you're going to do a 3-issue miniseries for the 40th anniversary, written by Larry Hama, showing your version of Overkill losing parts of his body and becoming the fully robotic version of Overkill, even though that's probably not Larry Hama's favorite version of that character, I will also buy that and read it. I will also talk about that on a future episode of this show. I accept that responsibility. And listeners, send those emails to letters@idwpublishing.com.
See, I want to see that story too.
You know, or I mean, I don't know. Like, it wasn't. I'm trying to remember. Major Blood was killed off, right? Or I'm trying to remember where he was last seen. It was a while back, right?
There was an issue. I've no idea what the number is, but there was an issue where he was on the cover with Lady J in a blindfold, and it was Chuckles went on a bit of a John Wick mission to kind of take him down. I think he escaped. That might have been the last time that we saw him in current chronology.
I was gonna say maybe Overkill could be like a rebuilt Major Blood who survived some injuries and you know.
And we did see Major Blood in a flashback recently set around issue 33.
Yeah. I was thinking in terms of chronology of the last time in the current chronology that we saw.
The same way that this issue 286 added some backstory. You know, like how did Major Blood get his robot hand? How did he get that eye patch?
Right. Yep.
His spotlight issue could be a flashback, or it could be him doing something interesting with Joes or Cobras or third-party mercenaries nowadays. I'll buy all of them, IDW.
You know, I should correct something I said earlier, by the way. I was saying that when they started showing the flashback stories with 26 and 27 and stuff about how that made it feel like a more serious book. You know, of course there were stories before that, like, of course, Silent Interlude and a lot of great issues and great art before that. So it wasn't as if those were the first issues, but you know what I mean? Like those put more meat on the bone of those characters and things. And yeah. So it wasn't as if the book wasn't already fundamental. Yeah.
Sorry, those two issues leveled up the book.
Yeah.
And you can look at other. I mean, one of the reasons why I like to proselytize about G.I. Joe comics to people is that I think a lot of people assume that G.I. Joe was sort of as good as Marvel's Star Wars, Marvel's Transformers, Marvel's He-Man, Marvel's Dino Riders, and
Marvel's Crystal Warriors. What was it, Crystal Warriors or something?
Yeah, and like everyone, those are all fun comics. G.I. Joe is an excellent and transcendent licensed book, right? It's not just like better than you think it's going to be. It's excellent.
And it was one of their highest selling books in the 80s. You know, when you look at sales charts from back then, it's like G.I. Joe was selling like as much as the X-Men or more, you know? It was, if I remember right, and Spider-Man and stuff. It was up there. It was one of their top books.
It had the benefit of being advertised on television, and oh man, would the writers of all the other Marvel books have appreciated that? It's almost unfair.
And those great little animated commercials, you know, with the tie-ins of the comics and stuff.
Yeah.
I had one last generic question before we get into the detail of 286. Which was just around your approach to the covers. And, you know, there was quite a lot of iconic kind of type shots there. We had Sherlock in front of the Humvee on 281. Sherlock and Chuckles sort of looking around a corner, you know, in the Capitol. We had an all-girl lineup. And then I think your final cover was that iconic shot of the team with the flag kind of background. What was your approach to kind of the covers? And I'm guessing they were done in advance of necessarily knowing what was in the issue themselves, which was why you had to keep it slightly more as a kind of iconic lineup for some of those.
Those were, and it was very similar. Like when I first started, way back when I started on the Transformers ongoing, and I didn't have any scripts yet, and I had free time, and they're like, well, why don't you do some covers? I'm like, well, what are the covers like going to be of if we don't script? And they're like, well, here's like a rough outline of the story. So I would just kind of pitch different covers, and they'd say, okay, go with this one or go with that one, and they more or less fit in with the story that John had planned out. So it was very much the same with this. They sent me like a rough idea what the story was going to be about and the different characters that Larry wanted to use throughout it. So I pitched a number of different cover ideas. I know the first one, that was Tom's idea. He sent me an image of like a female MP in her, military uniform and stuff in front of a Humvee. He's like, I was kind of, it'd be cool to have a cover kind of like this where, Sherlock's looking cool and like in her traditional army uniform in front of a Humvee. And then he's like, maybe you could throw in a couple other characters. And I'm like, he said that Hawk and Stalker would probably be in the first issue. So I added them in. So that was pretty much what that first, cover was, just based on Tom's idea. And then, what was it? Well, I'm sorry, what was the 282 cover? Was that the one with Sherlock and
that was
Chuckles?
Sherlock and Chuckles with
okay. Yep.
Helix in the background.
Well, they're like, it's going to be like it's going to be a, kind of like a murder mystery kind of a thing. They're like, he's like, so Tom was like, how about like a, Sherlock Holmes kind of movie poster kind of a thing. So, we sent back and forth some different movie posters and things, and I kind of took some cues from that with like, he had mentioned that Helix would probably be in it, Chuckles would probably be in it at some point, so it just felt kind of felt like it worked to have them on some undercover mission in like a city. I'm like, well, what city could I place it in? Because we were looking at like a Sherlock Holmes movie poster in Paris, and there was a character in the background kind of walking, kind of like Helix is in that one. So he said, well, it's going to be set in D.C., so it made sense to put the Capitol building in the back, and then, the Washington Monument, I guess. So yeah, it just kind of came together. It was inspired by like movie posters and things. And then as far as the all-female one, it just kind of felt like, it's like, I was thinking there really aren't, it feels like there are, but there really aren't that many female characters in G.I. Joe. And, there's a new one added to the ranks. And like, I don't know, that'd be cool to see them all together and see her fitting in amongst the rest of these classic characters. And so that was kind of the genesis of that. It wasn't meant to be literal to what was in the issue. And then the same thing with like them all jumping out of the tomahawk was, he had mentioned, he's like, at some point we'll probably have, Snake Eyes and Stalker and Hawk and Scarlet in it. And I'm like, oh, those are some of my favorite characters. I'm like, what if I just do like an action shot of them jumping out of a tomahawk? And so I drew that, and then a few people had pointed out that like there are some similarities to another classic cover of them jumping out of a tomahawk, and I'm like, that could have been like a subliminal, subconscious thing in my mind, but I definitely wasn't trying to homage that. If I was, it would have been more literal, more direct. I would have definitely made it more of a direct homage, but that could have been in the back of my mind. And then so for 285, that cover, it was kind of funny because Tom was like, I don't remember if it actually did, but at the time it was originally planned to come out around July 4th. So he's like, maybe you can do like a patriotic kind of classic group G.I. Joe shot. So like 285 is really inspired by this old like Michael Golden, covers, some specific ones like that one yearbook cover and stuff that just a classic shot of some of my favorite characters. And I asked James to like look at certain old images of group shots and group shots of like vehicles and things to try to get like that, the color tone to look kind of like those older covers. So that was kind of the inspiration for 285 with Duke and Roadblock with the flag and everything. Yeah, so they were pretty much just kind of like pitched a couple different ideas, roughly knowing where the story was going to go and trying to keep them kind of vague and kind of, just kind of classic shots. And that's kind of that was the genesis of the covers.
Excellent. Thank you. So we can move on into the detail of 286.
Comic talk, oh, comic talk. Larry Hama writes them, Tim and Mark discuss them, whoa. Comic talk, oh, comic talk. Larry Hama writes them, Tim and Mark discuss them, whoa.
Okay, so we are talking 286, released 22nd of September 2021, the distant future. Writer Larry Hama, artist Andrew Lee Griffith, colours Jay Brown, letters Neil Utaki, senior editor Tom Waltz, editor Megan Brown, research specialist Diana Davis. Sitrep, a soldier for his country, later a covert operative for Cobra, then an elite fighter for G.I. Joe, but always an Arashikage ninja first and foremost. He's Tommy Arashikage, and this is Spotlight Storm Shadow.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
So before we go into the interiors, we'll have a quick look at the covers. We've got cover 1, art by Freddie Williams. The second, colours by Jeremy Caldwell, with Snake Eyes in a first of a connecting cover series, very much influenced by the opening sequence to G.I. Joe the movie. Cover B is art by Alex Sanchez with colours by Cullen Davis. Storm Shadow doing a high-flying kick. And cover R1 is a sketch by Larry Hama of the LLRP, which looks to be dated probably 2010, possibly 2016. The O isn't quite closed, so hard to tell for sure. Thoughts on these covers, guys?
So it's great to have Freddie Williams II back doing a bunch of interlocking covers. Originally, it was 5 different covers that were announced, and you can in fact buy the original art right now on Freddie Williams II's website for those other 5 for 286 through 290. So Mark and I were sort of musing earlier today why the announced interlocking Freddie Williams II covers were replaced by a different set. I love G.I. Joe the movie. I love the opening sequence. I don't love crossing over sort of imagery from the animated series to the comic book because they are so separate, and because Larry Hama did not write for the show, and the people who wrote for the show have not written the comics. So this big Cobra airship that we see silhouetted by the full moon on this cover A of issue 286, and then this battle over the Statue of Liberty. Initially, I think, oh, cool, it's that thing from G.I. Joe the movie. That's the best G.I. Joe animation ever. And then I think, that airship isn't in this issue. Snake Eyes isn't in costume in this issue. This is not a battle at the Statue of Liberty. And so I feel like there's a disconnect. And then the disconnect continues because cover B is this cool image of Storm Shadow in his white costume. And of course, this whole issue is a flashback, and we don't see Storm Shadow in his sort of Cobra uniform either. And the last 5 issues, which had 5 connecting covers by Freddie Williams II, those were the B covers. And I feel like this B cover with Storm Shadow should be the A cover because it's a Storm Shadow spotlight issue. It's not an issue about Snake Eyes defending the Statue of Liberty and beating up some trouble bubbles. And then congratulations to Cullen Davis on coloring his second G.I. Joe cover. And then if I can correct something tiny that Mark just said, it's RI, not R1, because it stands for retailer incentive.
Yeah,
but you can keep hosting the show. So here's this amazing Larry Hama sketch from 6 or 11 years ago, not sure, of the LERP group. And this should have been the cover. This should have been a cover.
Yeah.
And they should have rotated this 90 degrees. And like Marvel does for a lot of their collections, soft covers and hardcovers, when they have a wraparound cover and they turn it into just a front cover, they shrink it to 30%. There's a giant black above and below space for the logo. Doesn't grab your attention quite as much. But I would have taken this precise Larry Hama sketch, darkened the pencils in Photoshop, handed them off to a colorist who would color everything, just the characters in the water, not even the sky, with 25% saturation. Don't overwhelm this with loud, intense colors, and or hand this image to someone else to ink. But I mean, I want to hand this issue to people because it's a great issue, and it scratches an itch that I didn't know I had, and it, like I said before, connects to some other favorite and famous issues. And yet, if I hand cover, I own a comic book store, and I'm always happy every month to put the new issue of G.I. Joe on our new comics rack. And I had a couple copies of A and B on our new rack. And like, this isn't, A and B are not the covers to sell this issue. Like, here's the cover that this issue really wants. It wants Storm Shadow in his white ninja costume, like his head and shoulders big, like up on the top left or top right with space for the logo. And then in the bottom 2/3 of the cover, sort of the scene that Larry drew, where we see Storm Shadow in flashback with these other guys in their Vietnam gear. Like, but in full color, like a montage cover. Like, oh, come on. This issue was so great. And it totally dropped the ball in terms of art direction for the cover. And if you're sort of scratching your head, I'll just rattle off 5 quick things. Like, what's a better cover for this issue? G.I. Joe, 38? What's a better cover for this issue? The Nom number 2, the Nom number 11, the Nom number 13. You know, like a comic book, I get it. It has to sell the comic, and like collectors want A and B, and if there's a connecting thing, they'll get excited and they'll come back the next 4 months and get more. And like, yes, Snake Eyes is in the issue and something important happens involving Snake Eyes, but like, oh man, what a missed opportunity to match the intensity, the content, the feeling of the interior with the cover.
Oh well. Covers aside, let's have a look at the interiors and a quick summary from me with the plot breakdown. Stalker recounts to Scarlet of the time that the long-range recon patrol beta team of Snake Eyes, Wade Collins, Dickie Saperstein and Ramon Escobedo met Storm Shadow back in Vietnam. The team encountered Storm Shadow, aka Fresno, aka Tomishiburo Arashikage, aka Tommy, as Alpha Team are flown in with 4 of the Team KIA and the Sergeant wounded. Tommy is the only man left standing from the team. Bravo Team volunteer to take care of the team with dignity. Snake Eyes' first interaction with Tommy is to intervene and serve up his food in the mess tent. As the only remaining member of the Alpha Squad, Tommy joins Bravo Squad. Snake Eyes is silent with the rest of the squad and somewhat antisocial, but Tommy makes an effort to reach out to him, and they would go off to talk for hours, seemingly. And after giving his team the silent treatment, Snake Eyes shocks them by speaking with advice to Ramon on writing home to his mother. Don't lie to her, just don't tell her the truth. Later, on a routine patrol, the LLRP are crossing a stream when their sergeant, Sergeant Lipton, is shot. Snake Eyes is in the middle of the stream returning fire, firing 3 belts of ammo to provide cover for his team. Later, Stalker arrives at the base camp as Bravo Team returns to see Lipton carried off the medevac chopper by Bravo. The next day, he takes over as team leader. So let's get into it.
What an amazing issue. It's such a good issue.
It's very good. What struck me, sort of, putting that plot breakdown together, is how much of a character and mood piece this is, rather than necessarily one that's driven by lots and lots of plot. You know, often there'll be, in the typical G.I. Joe issue, there'll be, an action sequence, characters getting from A to B, yada, yada, yada. This is very much... exactly what happens. I think is less significant in than the tone, the feel that is being created. Spending time with these characters, filling in some of the holes, getting to know them essentially.
Something that G.I. Joe is about is loyalty, sticking up for your buddies. Sometimes that's everyone at the bottom. Sometimes that's someone in authority breaking the rules and sticking up for their subordinates. And this issue is very much about, in several different places, right? Like supporting your team, supporting your buddies. And the strongest example of that is offloading corpses from Huey after it comes back from a mission, and the scene plays out sort of 1.5 times. And, similarly, this is such a small moment, but Tommy goes to the mess hall and the cook wants to toss him out because he's got blood on him, having just returned from a mission. Snake Eyes goes in there and stares down the cook and then grabs the spoon or the ladle and puts some food on Tommy's tray. I think we could also maybe read a subtext in there, which is that Tommy's Japanese, right? He's Asian. Here are all these Americans in Vietnam fighting all these Vietnamese and maybe hating all these Asian people who are sort of in this war, both with them and against them. And so even though Tommy's not Vietnamese and he's not the enemy, I think we could read a racial and racist undertone to this scene. But it's very much, right, the context of it, not the subtext, is like, don't come into my mess hall looking all bloody, smelling like a mess. But, even the soldier who's back from a terrible mission deserves more respect than that. And, this issue actually reminded me of, we've mentioned a lot of issues that this issue feels like or ties in with, and we haven't mentioned 155. This issue feels like 155.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, I guess, flashbacks, and generally, as we've mentioned, they've been pretty small glimpses at a time. That we've had 26, 43, 94, 155, and even more recently 246 returning to the LERP era. But this is a dedicated full issue, and sort of unlike those others where it's been small glimpses filling in these gaps in the story. It's a complete extended sequence in itself.
This issue also, I mentioned the Nam before when I was talking about covers, and I mean this as a compliment. This issue feels like an issue of the Nam. So in 87, at Jim Shooter's suggestion, Larry Hama, with his editor's hat on, right? We sometimes forget Larry was an editor at Marvel. That was his day job. And G.I. Joe was his freelance night job, writing G.I. Joe. Larry put together Doug Murray and Michael Golden, writer and artist, to roll out this monthly comic that would move in real time, right? Each issue was a month later, and in the story had progressed a month later. So after 12 or 13 issues, the protagonist goes home because his tour's over. And that's a great Marvel series. Over the years, the editorial changed, and sort of the rules of the book changed, and the Punisher showed up. And I like those issues, but it does distract a little bit. And so much of that series, partly because Hama was the editor for the first 2 or so years, is this, it's code approved, right? It's not an R-rated comic. It's comics code approved, but it's regular guys doing this terrible work, getting the shaft, sticking up for each other. And then, of course, overlapping iconography here, right? It's the same equipment, it's the same uniform, it's the same backgrounds and locations. And you get some of the nuts and bolts of, like things break, or this piece of equipment is overheating and I have to do something about it. So just as this issue reminded me of some other issues of G.I. Joe, it also, not even page 2 at the inside front cover, I thought, I think this is going to be like an issue of the Nam. That's one of my favorite Marvel series. So that was a mental thumbs up.
Larry actually pointed that out in the plot. He said, this is, like, think of the Nam, think of that comic as an influence on this. He specifically pointed that out. So it's good that you recognize that. That's a good thing, because it was never explicitly referenced, I don't think, in this comic, but it was definitely a touchstone or an influence.
Something that Hama has said recently in 1 or 2 interviews, and I think this was actually in the context of the new movie, where we've moved away from the military stuff in general and the Vietnam sort of as a flashback, because that timeline doesn't work anymore. Hama has said, like even regarding the comic, it sort of gets harder and harder to do those flashbacks, because if you think too hard about what year it is and the time that's passed, it sort of breaks down. And I think we're all willing to forget, like I watch, The Simpsons like every week for 25 years, and it's like Bart's still in third grade or whatever. Like I understand how this works. And I also have to imagine that as writer, Hama sort of asks himself, well, do I want to tell a new story with established characters and move the overall narrative ahead? Or do I want to do a flashback, which might feel like sort of something safer, right? Is that less of a challenge? Because like clearly all the readers are going to gobble up like some flashback with the original Snake Eyes because, we all have these strong feelings about the death of Snake Eyes and the two characters who have sort of taken that role. And so I have to assume that Hama as writer wants to challenge himself and sort of goes back and forth between, it's like, well, how much of this should be a flashback to sort of a story that takes place between issue 1 and issue now, or a flashback that takes place before issue 1, or a story that takes place right now and it's something that had never happened before. And that said, I don't think that writing this issue or this kind of issue is actually any easier. It may just sort of feel comfortable, familiar, and safe.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know like what his inspiration was or in choosing to write this as a form of a flashback. I just remember them saying, well, if we're doing spotlight issues, is there any character you'd like to work on? And I said, yeah, I'd love to do a Storm Shadow thing. And they said, well, that's great because Larry has an idea for a Storm Shadow story. I didn't know at the time it was going to be a flashback, but
I guess this might have been one that's been kicking around for a while and sort of just
it could well be
kind of forming in his mind. In the back of in Tom Waltz's note in the back of the book, he described it as a personal that for Larry it was personal and often times tough tale to write and share. And reading it does feel like it's kind of written with a real sense of truth, and I would suspect that it's very much Larry's story that potentially some of these sequences and the characters involved are inspired by events that he actually experienced himself during his time in Vietnam, and it would be interesting to find out which nuggets that are purely fictional and which have got this grain from his real life experience.
Yeah, it feels very personal. I was curious myself about that.
But even the word balloon that's biographical about Storm Shadow, that's not about combat. My mom was born and raised in Sacramento, but my dad came over from Japan. He died when I was 10. That is at least partially autobiographical.
No, I was just going to say, I was very curious about that as well myself, and I was kind of surprised actually that they explicitly said it was Vietnam. I don't know, I haven't read the final published book, but in the PDF I got, it definitely said Vietnam, because in the plot it said it wanted to leave it. It seemed like it wanted to leave it vague. I think it said like a Far East or jungle country or something, like something similar to like Vietnam, because I thought they were trying to get away from, like the Marvel has that problem with like Iron Man being, originally from Vietnam era, and then it got changed to Afghanistan and stuff. So like I was under the impression they wanted to leave it vague, but yeah, so I was just a little surprised when they explicitly said it was Vietnam.
Yeah, page 1, panel 3, box Vietnam. It's there's no doubt there. So, yeah.
Oh well, at the same time, yes, the continuity, the timeline is plastic, but if you needed this to not be like 1968 or 1972, if you needed this to be like 15 years before the current events of G.I. Joe happening right now, I mean, the military still does conduct missions in lots of places. So I think there's a little bit of cover.
Exactly. Yeah.
if that word Vietnam in a caption is sort of too much of a pinpoint.
Right. Plus, the world of like this G.I. Joe continuity takes place in a different world where they've had different, military battles and wars that we haven't had, and vice versa. So like there could be some more recent, war taking place in Vietnam anyway. So
Yeah, it's kind of comic book, logic, and I think it's easy enough to look past it. What was interesting from a plot point of view as well is that, this is sort of labelled up as a Storm Shadow spotlight, but as much as that, it's also Snake Eyes, and we're shown as much as we ever have of his time in that era, and clearly he's being established as a strong, silent man of mystery with a rep, and us really, I think, being pointed towards the fact that, to the extent that he was a silent man, even back in those days prior to him having his accident, and
right, man of silent action.
Exactly, and to the extent that his teammates are shocked by actually hearing him interject with some words of wisdom around writing that letter home. And it's I hadn't even sort of clocked this until I looked on some of the message board discussion around this issue, and this is actually Snake Eyes' first line of dialogue as written by Larry Hama, other than the one time that he said Scarlet back in issue 102. So yeah. Here we go. It's Snake Eyes' first, let's call it sentence, his first line of dialogue.
So
in a G.I. Joe.
I think there's something worth.
Yeah, that's a big moment.
Yes, when I turned the page and saw that I turned the page. I'm looking on the left page, but my eye naturally goes to the right page, and I see the guy with sunglasses, and he's got 2 word balloons, and in my brain I screamed, "Holy!" and then the S word. And then I thought, wait, calm down. Get to that panel naturally. Read the left page, then read the right page. And I was already enjoying the issue. So I think there are a couple things that we all know in the back of our mind that it's worth saying aloud. So Snake Eyes in modern... I don't mean when he's dead, after issue 215, whatever it was. I mean, Snake Eyes in G.I. Joe, right? There are sort of rules, right? He's in black. We don't see his face. He doesn't talk. He's scarred. He doesn't talk because he can't talk. Before the accident that scarred him and robbed him of his voice, he could talk. In all the flashbacks, both in Vietnam and also in all the flashbacks, when he could talk, there's this sort of rule in the Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic, which is that he doesn't. It's not that he can't. And it's not like sort of in the first live action movie, like the first live action movie sort of like implied that he'd taken a vow of silence or something, right? It's like, oh, he doesn't talk. So in these flashbacks, this guy can talk, but he doesn't, right? And that is sort of a reverse echo of the rules for the character. Similarly, his face isn't scarred, but we're not going to see his face. He's wearing sunglasses, his face is in shadow, where he's wearing that hat. And this is all like a playful reinforcing. It's like if you draw young Bruce Wayne before he ever becomes Batman and you have like a cast shadow behind him, you like make the shadow shaped like Batman, right? Like that's a fun thing you can do with visualizing a character, just as in sort of creating these quote rules for Snake Eyes, Hama can reinforce the character with things that we sort of already know that logically haven't happened yet. So when he does speak, it is shocking and powerful. And then that he says something that is so powerful, right? It's not like in the mess hall, he like grabs the ladle from the cook who's being a jerk to Storm Shadow. And he says, give him his food, he's earned it. Like, that'd be a good line too, but like that scene didn't need to be the like first time in 100 issues that Snake Eyes, 150 issues that Snake Eyes has said anything. And I also think there's something going on with Snake Eyes not talking, in that, like in reading stories set in Vietnam, movies, TV, and also comics like The Nam and others, there is an idea that, like, you don't make friends because your friend may get injured or die, and it's too hard to deal with that, right? So you just stick to yourself, or you don't let people in to your sort of real life or your home life because you just want to like get through your 12 months in Vietnam and go home, right? So like, yeah, they know that he's writing to his sister, but he doesn't talk to them. And then lastly, this doesn't have any like special meaning. This is just an observation. I've never thought of Snake Eyes as one of the big Joes. Rock and Roll's a big Joe. Salvo's a big Joe. Roadblock is a big Joe. But here, it's like, oh, Snake Eyes has the M60. Oh, you must be one of the bigger Joes.
Yeah, that kind of surprised me too when I saw that in the plot, that he was handling like the heavy machine gun, but it wasn't how I had thought of him, what his role would have been, but I guess that was meant to be like how he evolved over time into being more of like the more, I don't know, subtle warrior, if you'd say, with the quieter weaponry and the quiet but deadly kind of character. I guess it was meant to, imply that he had evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
Was it clear how Tommy switched with the bow and the arrow? Because the fact that his gun jammed was meant to imply that that's why he went to start relying more on the bow and the arrow. So, like when he first shows up, he's wearing the bow and the arrow. I mean, the quiver and the bow and everything. Because I'm like, well, he'd have to have it with him if he switches to it later. Because Larry had said, he shouldn't be carrying it at first. But then I'm like, well, where does it come from if he doesn't arrive to the base originally with it? So, like, I hope that all worked out well.
Yes, it did. Clear. Yes, it is.
Okay, good.
And that's a nice sort of logical character and story bit of juggling there. That this prop, both as a thing that we would or wouldn't see, and then also as a bit of character deliberation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's the kind of stuff you have to think through. It's like because I don't know, because when he first arrived, he didn't mention anything about what he had with him. But later on, I actually I had to change one panel where I had originally drawn it when they're on patrol. He wouldn't have had it then because he was using his gun, because he specifically said he wasn't using his bow and arrow yet. But then later on, I'm like, well, should I switch it when he arrives? But then I'm like, no, he'd have to bring it with him so he'd have it later, wouldn't he? So, because I imagine it wouldn't be like some standard issue thing. It would be something that he would have brought with him from his family's, business, quote unquote. So I don't know. I would think. So anyway, I'm just glad that works, and it was clear that because that was a plot point Larry wanted to point out, that the reason he in the other flashbacks when he's using the bow and the arrow so silently and stuff, that's why he relied on that so much, was because his gun had jammed before. And I imagine if you're in the middle of a firefight and your gun jams, that's got to be.
It was fascinating in reading this issue to realize 2/3 of the way through that Stalker is narrating the tale, and yet he hadn't shown up in the flashback yet. And then I thought, oh, this other guy who we haven't known before is going to have to exit the story so Stalker can join the team. And then I turn the page and this guy exits the story. And then Stalker says on the final page, in the final panel, that then he joined the team. I also thought there was a really nice resonance in this story where the first two panels, and not the last panel, but in my mind, the last panel flashes forward again to Fort Wadsworth with Stalker and Scarlet, on Staten Island in New York. The first two panels of this whole comic could have taken place anywhere. They could have taken place in the pit. They could have taken place in Springfield, mopping up from, one of the recent missions. It could have taken place just at any restaurant in any small town. And Larry recently posted to Facebook his cover sketch for that issue. Mark, I'm sure you can remind us since I don't remember the number, but it's the Larry sketch variant cover where it's Snake Eyes and Scarlet on the Staten Island ferry. And Larry on Facebook said something like "my favorite cover" or "my favorite cover sketch," and Larry Hama's a New Yorker, and that the Joe base is originally in New York is probably a part of that. And so for Stalker and Scarlet to have this exchange at Fort Wadsworth, right, like adds a little emotional weight to it that a lot of other locations wouldn't have felt as like inherently G.I. Joe, and wouldn't have felt as sort of localized to these characters.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was a really good choice. And ironically, I actually drove past Fort Wadsworth like the day after I drew that page. So that one thing that made it was kind of neat. I was like, hey, look at that. Because ironically, I was traveling while working on this issue, so visiting my mom and stuff. So like I drew most of this issue on my mom's guest room, sitting on a bed on a big clipboard instead of my normal big drawing table setup. So anyway, so that kind of added to this being on like a tight deadline. Is like there were certain days where I was going to be traveling and I couldn't, but I flew into JFK, so I drove through Staten Island. But it was just kind of funny. I was like, hey, look at that, Fort Wadsworth.
I sometimes play the game when I read modern issues of G.I. Joe, right? IDW comics these days are 20 pages, and the Marvel run of G.I. Joe, all the issues were 22 pages, right? The economics of comics, right? Printing is expensive. And I sometimes when I get to the end of a modern comic that's only 20 pages, I'm aware that it feels a little shorter than a comic I would have read 15 years ago. And sometimes I'll think, oh, I wonder what the writer and artist might have done if they'd had one more page or two more pages. What scene in the story might have breathed a little bit more? Or in some cases, is it sort of told just as well? Like it's not like it was too short or too rushed. It was just a different rhythm and a different take. Because I liked those first two panels at Fort Wadsworth, when I got to the final panel and Stalker's narration sort of caps the story, in my mind, I'm sort of picturing him and Scarlet still in the vamp at that gate, or maybe now they've like parked and they're going inside. And so had there been one more page, I sort of pretended that they've gotten out of the vamp and it's like sunset or something. Like he's told this whole story over the last couple of hours. They got to Fort Wadsworth when she asked the question. He tells the story, and then we can have this, dramatic visual. But it is also, this is not
like a little bookend.
Yeah, this is also not a criticism. I think the story works sort of in every way, and I do like the final panel because we're focusing on the guy that Stalker is replacing. And so this, it's a Storm Shadow spotlight issue, but it's also a Snake Eyes spotlight issue, but it's Stalker's story, but Scarlet is the inciting event or character because she asks the question.
Right.
And there's this abruptness to that final panel as well. It's a relatively small panel sort of capping off the story, and it's there's the dead former sergeant being taken out of the helicopter, and Stalker concluding, the next day I took over as new team leader. And it's sort of that abruptness and almost arbitrariness of, yep, this is what happens. The sergeant dies, new guy gets swapped in. That's the way of life for these poor guys in this environment in Vietnam.
Well, the two things is like I did think that that was a good place to end it, and it was really kind of highlights that what happened. He's getting taken off and he didn't make it. So because I thought that was a good place to end it. But I did think it also kind of echoed in 281 when Sherlock gets taken away with the helicopter, with the lighting and everything, when the helicopter comes in there with him on it. But what I was going to say is funny is I remember when I was working on Transformers on the ongoing, I think around issue 20 or so is when IDW, they changed from 22 pages to 20 pages. And I remember like it made deadlines so much easier to meet. So in one hand it was nice, but on the other hand, there are always a few issues now and then where it's like it would be nice to have just a little more space to tell the story just to highlight something at the end or to add something even in the middle and extend it out a little bit. But like, it would be nice sometimes to have those extra 2 pages, but other times it's just nice because you can get the issue done easier on time.
The other thing that occurred to me, sort of reading this, is these characters have lived in our memories and minds for a little while since being introduced for the first time in those early issues like 26 and 43, but sort of really giving them fleshing them out much more, and so one of the characters, and they're all very distinct. So we kind of know them more than perhaps some of the core G.I. Joe team by this point. So we've obviously Stalker, Storm Shadow, Snake Eyes. We know well. We also know an awful lot about Wade Collins, and then sort of the remaining two, Dickie Sapstein and Ramon as well. Sort of very distinct characters, and Dickie particularly I felt was fleshed out here. That he's clearly a German Jew, so there's lots of German language and also reference to his Jewish culture. The Sapstein name is a compound of the Hebrew Saphir, so meaning sapphire, and German Stein, meaning stone. He wears an iron cross on his hat, which struck me as an interesting touch and possibly a conflicted touch, because it's often
that specifically is a sharpshooter insignia, I believe.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, I had to look that up. That was a specific, I believe that was a sharpshooter insignia. I don't want to get the terminology wrong, but I believe that's what that was. So that that didn't have any other kind of, I can't think of the word. I'm sorry, but yeah, that didn't have any extra meaning or anything.
Yeah, because it looked like a German iron cross, and I thought with that.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that it wasn't anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. With the German, with the short Jewish background, that might, and a Jewish German background, it might make for a conflicted, slightly conflicted character. But perhaps as you say, there's a different meaning that I hadn't picked up on.
Someone with more military knowledge than me might know better, but I believe it was a sharpshooter insignia. I believe, or badge.
The other little nuance that I picked up around Dickie was that he's sort of told off when they're writing their letters at some point. They say to him, "Save that for when you're a short timer." And ironically, when we see him in the next these sequence of events, before he dies, at this point it must be a little while on, and at that point this is in issue 155 when they're showing the flashbacks, they do describe him as a short timer. They say Dickie Sapstein was a short timer too. He had less than 2 months to go before he rotated home. His letter was from his mum. Dickie's dad was in the hospital and needed an operation. They didn't have the bucks. Uncle Sugar was offering a cash re-up bonus back then. You sign up for a burst of 4 and Sam gave you the down payment on a brand new Camaro, or a heart valve dilation in this case. Dickie was kind of burnt out by then. He had the dreads. Before every mission, he puked his guts out, but he did his job. We knew he would never let the team down. So Dickie signed up, got his bonus, and extended his tour. His dad died on the operating table. So sort of establishing a slightly different dynamic that they're much earlier on in their military careers here versus the final time that they're on that fateful mission when they Ramon and Dickie are killed.
Yeah, in the ambush. And was it 43?
Yes.
I was just gonna say, it reminds me a bit of my great uncle. I'm sure a lot of people have stories like this in their families, but he served in World War II, and in the Battle of the Bulge, he died from like he was trying to take out a machine gun emplacement or something, and I believe it was. And then like my uncle has this letter where he had sent it like a week before he died, like sending home to his wife and stuff, like, I can't wait to to meet the new baby and all this kind of stuff. It just really hits home, the unexpected sacrifice and like how people expect to be coming home and don't, and it's the tragedy of it, and just kind of reminds me of that. But anyway, I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure a lot of people have similar stories in their family and stuff.
I spy with my little eye.
Okay, so I Spy is where we look at some of the little details that might have otherwise escaped people's notice. I Spy Snake Eyes wearing sunglasses on night recon.
Again, rules of the comic. Page 13, panel 3. The team is, I think, burning human waste, burning feces in those buckets, which I learned from the Nom, the other Marvel comic that I've talked about. So this,
I did wonder.
They're not burning food or trash. They're burning feces because
That's definitely what it is. In fact,
that's a job that you don't want to do, that like someone has to do, and either like the last person back from like dinner has to do as a punishment, or the person who loses at cards, or the whole team has to do it because they're in trouble. It's not fun.
yeah, in fact, I think in the plot, I think Larry even said we won't specifically say that, but that is what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Is Andrew the nurse, or the donut dolly, the first aid? Sorry, the Red Cross woman who kisses Snake Eyes on the cheek. Did the plot suggest that she look a certain way or look like someone? Did you have someone in mind, or is this just a?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. She was supposed to. Yeah, she was definitely supposed to look reminiscent of his sister. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That okay.
Ah.
In fact, that's even isn't that referenced in the dialogue? Doesn't he say that she thinks that he's looking at her for different reasons?
Yeah, but I was wondering if it's like, make her look like this famous actor, or like, if you had someone in mind. But yes, it's I understand that it's sort of maybe less interesting and more direct than I was guessing, which is totally fine. Yes, it is in the plot.
Yeah, she wasn't supposed to look like a specific actress. I did kind of. Larry had sent me some reference photos of donut dollies, and I had, done some reference online, and there was one that kind of like I kind of it was a mix of like making her look like its sister and trying to make her look kind of like a real one that looked kind of like had the right kind of face.
So one of mine was that I Spy Tommy using the Swedish K. Whereas in issue 43 flashback, Wade had that gun, and that could be an error detected, but it's not. This is just Larry doing his thinking. It's not because of inconsistency. It's because in this story, Tommy is the point man, so that is the weapon that is provided to the point man for that position in the team. And on that particular flashback, it was Wade who was on point, and so would have been using that gun.
Right. Yeah. That was very specifically pointed out by Larry.
I Spy a Larry Hama sketch dated 2020 of Sherlock in the final column of the letters page. It's
Right.
not called out as anything in particular. It reminds me of when you'd read an issue of G.I. Joe in the late 80s, and at the bottom of the third column of the letters page would be next month's cover, and it would say next month, and sometimes that was actually to get you to know what the next month's issue looked like, and I think a lot of times it was to fill space, because you have to know sort of how many words are going to fill how much of your page, and if you have like 2 inches left to fill as the editor or the designer of that page, sometimes it's just easier to slot in some art, like let's just grab a close-up of a panel from this issue they just read and stick it in, and we can plug that hole of 2 inches. So I like this both as a reminder that we're going to see Sherlock next issue, but also as a hole plug.
Andrew, have you? That was the end of my I Spies. Andrew, have you remembered any tiny little details that you might have snuck in that we might have eluded our eyes so far?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything at the moment. I did just see a coloring error, but I don't. It's a little late now to point that out. But I did. The second time you see Scarlet and Stalker, part of you see a bit of entrance into Fort Wadsworth, and there should be between the roof of the ramp of I'm sorry, between the roof of the vamp and that there should be some sky, but it's filled in all green. I'm not, but anyway, it's not a. It's probably something no one even.
I will write that email.
I spied it though.
I will write that email to letters@idwpublishing.com with a small request to fix that mistake for future digital versions and the print recollection.
Overall, I think like James did a phenomenal job on the colors in this issue. I was really happy with them. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see too much. Like I know that like I put a decent amount of thought into what was like on the shelves inside of the. I can't think of the word for the hooch? Is that what it's called?
Quonset hut?
The like. Yeah. On the shelves, you know, like I was thinking about like, well, what would be there? You know, magazines and maybe some cups and like different things. I know I put a fair amount of thought into what would actually be the things on the shelves. But it's funny, you were talking earlier about covers and how it bothers you when the cover doesn't match so well with what the issue is and things. And it does bug me too when like there's an issue like this that I'm really happy with, that like I really wish I could have had the cover just to have the complete package, you know, myself, like to have more ownership of it or whatever. But that was one of the situations where the other issues were getting a bit behind, and like they had to have someone else do the covers for these. So like by the time I caught up and was able to do this, the covers were already accounted for and in the solicits and stuff. So I wasn't able to do a cover for this one, but it would have been nice to be able to do a cover. I think I would have done something more like the LRP team, kind of like one of Larry's sketches or something. But you know, it is what it is.
I've got one last I Spy now that we're talking about covers. Cover B, Alex Sanchez's signature is a word I don't quite recognize. Ironhead. Ironhed?
Yeah, that's like his nickname, his handle.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think like his Instagram account is something like Ironhead.
Okay.
Stop. Hammer time. Time to beat the soles of your boots with my face. Hammer time.
And this whole issue to some degree is, you know, it's Larry Hama, you know, through the center like a stick of rock. But one of the ones that stuck out for me was the barrel of the M60 as it was being fired is glowing white and so translucent you could see the bullets passing through it. Remarkable continuity as well with Tommy and his asbestos oven mitts that does call back to some previous sequences where Tommy was the man to help out Snake Eyes with his M60 barrels.
I want to talk about Mark's observation from a moment ago for a moment. A couple times on this show, when we've interviewed an artist who's drawn a Hama issue, we have asked them what it's like to draw from a Larry Hama plot. And similarly, in some interviews that I've read or one that I've conducted, I have learned that Hama writes his plots in a visual way. And I think sometimes when someone hears that on this podcast or like reads that in an interview, they sort of nod but maybe don't quite know what that means. And someone who I think is a lesser writer once wrote an issue of a very popular Wildstorm comic in like 1993, and the guy who drew that issue handed me the script, and I read it, and I thought, this is sort of exciting as like plots go, but like it didn't sort of make me excited. And years later, I'm thinking about like what artists have said about drawing a Larry Hama plot, or what Larry has talked about in writing one. And this goes back to him also being an artist, and he's like seeing the story in pictures. I don't know if that's a movie playing out in his head or he's seeing panels and pages, and then he just sort of transcribes it in script mode. And if he could draw faster or easier, he might just do breakdowns for every issue, or he might just draw an issue. So this scene right here, everyone who's listening, where Stalker is narrating, and it was so translucent you could see the bullets passing through it, right? The lands and rifling had been shot out, and there was decreased gas pressure, and the rounds were largely ineffective, but he kept right on shooting. That's like three things at once that to me are like very Larry Hama. One, it's the physicality of an object mechanically how it works. 2, it is something that it sort of is inherent to a character, right? Like this character is doing something that's difficult or futile, but they're still doing it anyway. And 3, it is a striking visual. And there are lots of great comic books written by great writers where the script isn't necessarily full of or has any striking visuals. And it may be the artist who creates striking visuals, certainly is creating any visualization out of these words, the character, the plot. I don't think we would ever get, I mean, certainly it's a combat scene at Vietnam. This isn't going to show up in an issue of Uncanny X-Men, right? I know that's always my go-to when I'm comparing G.I. Joe to some prototypical issue of Uncanny X-Men. No one will ever write a 3-panel sequence like this in an issue of X-Men, ever.
No, I think you're right. Like, and that was very specifically plotted out by him that even before it got to the dialogue phase and the plot and stuff, that you'd see the bullets passing through the translucent barrel and stuff. And it did feel very, very Larry Hama-esque, that little sequence.
I had some Larry Hama colloquialisms to talk to if you're ready for that.
There used to be a pudding that was over-egged. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. At first it was British, but then it was Commonwealth. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. But now there's a new player in town, a comic book writer of some renown. He's using real-world examples and peppering the issues with lots of samples. It's a Larry Hama colloquialism. He's talking G.I. Joe and all its heroism. Can you guess what it is? Is it something new? Now listen as Larry drops a slice of real life on you.
So this is the segment where we look at some unique language and phraseology that we wouldn't normally encounter outside of the pages of a G.I. Joe book, and try and explain away what they mean. So first up is SOS, which is what they're talking about eating back in the mess hall. Any knowledge or guesses of the meaning of that?
I'm going to guess that one or both of those S's is a 4-letter word.
That's right, the first one is. So it is shit on shingle. It's meat and gravy over biscuits or toast, a staple of the mess hall.
So I think in the plot it was just described as slop. So I just kind of drew it as like some slop, basically. So if you don't see toast or something, that's why.
No, it makes sense. Some sort of generic sort of slop, not particularly appetizing. The next one up I had was Carl Gustav, which is a specific weapon. I'm going to flub this. The Carl Sprit Espestal M45, known as the Carl Gustaf M45, and the Swedish KSMG is a 9x19mm Swedish submachine gun designed by Gunnar Johnson, adopted in 1945. It was the standard submachine gun of the Swedish Army from 1945 to 1965, and during the Vietnam War, the US Navy SEALs used it extensively because of the gun's qualities, which appealed to them mostly around the fact that the M45 could fire almost immediately out of the water. And again, a hammerism there, very specific weaponry. We had a good little phrase here, which was that Stalker had come from the Repel Deppel. Any guesses on that one?
The Nom used to have a glossary. Every issue would have a glossary. And at the beginning of the letters page for all the jargon, which is how I learned, all this stuff like LZ. Is this where you like the supply? Was this the supply closet? Like where you get your? Sorry, I don't know.
Close. In the context, it's where Stalker has come from to fill in this gap in the unit, and it stands for Replacement Depot, Repel Deppel. So it's US military terminology for a unit containing reserves or replacements.
Okay. It is funny, remember, like thinking of how many terms like this I've learned reading G.I. Joe comics, especially when I was young, like LZ and learning about tracers and all that, tracer fire and all that kind of stuff is like, yeah, it's amazing how much I learned reading these comics as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned here about green tracer fire in this issue, which visually looks quite unusual, but I imagine because it's been written by Larry that it's got a basis in fact that they would be encountering green tracer fire, and it would show up as these green lines.
Well, that's something too, is like, I was trying to draw a tracer fire in a more modern way. Like in the old issues, it would almost look like little pellets, but like when you look at actual photos of like, when you see tracer fire and stuff, it almost looks like a long line with like bits of like streaks in it, almost like the bullets in the translucent barrel. So I was trying to like draw like a long line that he could color in the tracer fire, but I don't know, it's kind of a tricky thing to try to draw and get right.
Yeah, I guess one of those things that you never know for sure unless you've actually encountered it in real life, what it would look like visually. But it's a striking and unusual effect in this particular sequence, because we're so used to I guess the sort of yellows and oranges and reds of gunfire. So next up is a sequence that every guest dreads, which is error detected.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
You'll be glad to know that my error detected is not art related. And actually I don't think is an error. I'm going to immediately no prize it. So it's in the early sequence where the helicopter is landing, and the Bravo team comes in to say that they want the bodies treated with respect and that they'll handle it, and the guy there says, no skin off my teeth. The expression, of course, should be no skin off my nose if you're not bothered about something, whereas if something is very a near miss, it's by the skin of your teeth. I think Larry must know that difference, and I'm explaining it away as a character feature that people get these expressions confused and conflated all the time. Only the other day that I heard someone say the expression "say boo to a ghost," and it was adamant that it was boo to a ghost. So yeah, people get confused by these expressions, and that's what's happening here. It's a character feature, not an error.
Well, I already pointed out the error that I saw, so.
And I don't have any,
I guess.
Wow, because Tim, Tim is established as someone who does like these flashback issues to be just right, and if he feels that there's something wrong, he will write in a letter.
There's certainly a lot of things I see where I'm like, I should have drawn that better, or should have kept in mind how it would look with colors, or it's like, or I could have done better here or there. But like I said earlier, it's always a matter of like how much time you have and how good you can do with the time you have.
Sure. Next up, we would normally have a favorite line of dialogue. I feel like we've quoted quite a lot of dialogue, so I've got nothing extra actually to call out here. But if either of you guys have got a favorite line of dialogue that we've not touched on today, please feel free.
I agree with Mark.
Okay. Cool. So I think that was it. Any concluding thoughts on this issue? It was for me. It was I've very much enjoyed the murder by assassination arc. I've really enjoyed the way that that's kind of motored along and introduced these new characters and sort of progressed the ongoing G.I. Joe plot. But as a solo issue, this is, chef's kiss. Great to go back to that era, flesh out, all of these key characters and spend some time with them. And yeah, a real sort of walk through their boots, a lot of atmosphere. yeah, a great issue to put in the hands of a lapsed G.I. Joe reader and try and persuade them of their persuade them that they should be reading the book.
My wrap-up thought is that this was a stunning issue. It was powerful and heartbreaking, and a nice change of pace from recent issues, from an arc, a different kind of self-contained spotlight issue. But, if it feels like, oh, this issue was so good, isn't it obvious that Hama should go back and do A, more flashbacks, B, more like origin stuff, C, more Vietnam stuff? I don't think any one kind of issue is easier or harder to write than any other. I think they're all equally hard to write. Like staring at a blank page or a blank document in a word processor. It's like, the writer of any book, this book particularly, has to contend with a lot of history, different kinds of fans wanting different kinds of things. And whether it's like a new story with new characters, a new story with old characters, or sort of an finger quotes old story, a flashback. What I mean to say is, just because this issue turned out so well and it sort of looked easy, like, oh yeah, we get this like origin of the first time this happened, and Stalker and Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, doesn't mean it was actually easier to make. Maybe it was harder.
Well, I'm just glad to hear you guys enjoyed the issue so much. It was definitely a thrill to get to work on it and put a lot into it. So it's always nice when people, enjoy it. The only one downside about this, like I said, was it would have been nice to do an issue like this and also be able to do the cover and have the complete package. But, so that was my one downside to this issue. But
maybe a fan can throw some money your way and have you do like a full page quote cover commission. It's like the cover you would draw for this issue, and then maybe you can put it on the internet, and then maybe IDW will run it as a variant for some other issue, and then you can sort of have those things together.
There you go. Some things happen like that now and then.
I could be that fan, perhaps. I'll shoot you an email.
Yeah, get in touch.
Cool. This is where Mark asks you to promote your website or Instagram, etc.
I usually go by Glove Studios, like glove like on a hand, and that just goes back to years ago before I did comics. I was trying to start my own like design company kind of thing, and I needed a name. And I was looking at websites that weren't taken yet. I was like, how about something studios? And something reminded me of a glove. And I'm like, I could say, I could tell a story around that, like design services that fit like a glove or something. Anyway, so I ended up naming my design services, whatever, Glove Studios. So I just went with that when I needed a name for my internet handles and things. So on Twitter and Instagram, Glove Studios. Also, I have a Store Envy store. It's not really active right now, but a lot of times I'll have prints and stuff on there. It's Glove Studios at Store Envy, ArtStation or DeviantArt. I'm also Glove Studios. So, and then when I have commissions open and stuff, I have a blog on Blogger. So it's Blogspot, Glove Studios. So whenever I open up commissions for conventions and things, I'll put the details there. But I'll usually promote that also on like Twitter and Instagram and stuff. So that's usually where you can find me.
Excellent. People do seek out Andrew, and hopefully it won't be too long before we see you back in the pages of G.I. Joe. Thanks again, and thanks for being so generous with your time.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nice to talk with you guys, and hopefully I'll talk with you more in the future. And I also hope to get back on the books as soon as possible, especially, I'd love to do stuff for the 40th anniversary. As I said earlier, I was that little kid who was super excited about these new G.I. Joe toys 40 years ago. So it would be great to take part in that too, in the anniversary. It's been fun.
Cool. So that was great. It's fantastic to have Andrew on and to find out more about the behind the scenes of these last 5 issues that he's been working on in particular. issue 286.
I knew that cover to 285 felt like Golden's cover to yearbook 2 and 1.
Yeah, we called it. But yeah, do you want to give a Yojo score?
I do. It's an 8. This is
an 8.
Yes.
Wow.
As you know, because I'm a grump, it would be a real challenge for IDW G.I. Joe to get to a 9 or a 10, because I would prefer this comic to be printed on not glossy paper, and I like a different take on colors. However, this issue was excellent, powerful, memorable. If you are a lapsed reader, if I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, if you're not thinking of reading this issue, buy this issue, read this issue, love this issue.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat there, Tim. I think great story, great art. 8 from me, maybe with a different cover and perhaps slightly more. I don't think the colours are bad, but I think slightly more period colours. So it's sort of more in keeping with the some of the issues that have come before. It would have been nice to kind of perhaps differentiate the current day sequence with perhaps the flashbacks, which is most of the issue, being maybe closer to the kind of original coloring style of the likes of issue 26 and so on. But yeah, very strong. So Tim, we know where we can find Andrew, but where can people find you?
My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is in Somerville, Massachusetts. Hubcomics.com, also Hubcomics at Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Me and G.I. Joe, I'm at arealamericanbook.com. You
can find the show at talkingjoe.co.uk. That's co.uk. And that has all of the links to all of the things that we do. So it has links to all of the different podcasts on the different platforms, including on YouTube, where we post the podcast with additional visual content. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also on email. So if you ever have a message for the show, you can find us very easily. We're also on Patreon, so a big thanks to our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, and Justin, who are all getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. And by early, I mean really super early now, because we've recorded a little bit of content extra, ahead of time from release, so some of those episodes are really super early for those guys. Now I think that's us done, but remember,
nobody beats Talking Joe, a real American podcast,
somehow presented by a guy from England. Later, and I won't say wankers, I'll say great listeners who are really respected and loved, except for one who's my brother, and he is a wanker. Bye.